Man, I gotta tell you, I'm already getting people like, hey, you need to talk about the U.S. Senate race in Illinois in 2026 because a Republican candidate announced just in the past week. I know there's another one who's laying the groundwork publicly. I gotta tell you, to be talking about 2026 elections already, I've got only one response to that.
Inconceivable.
From Princess Bride, inconceivable. No way in heck am I ready to be talking about 2026 races. So we're going to talk about Pritzker's budget address. We've got Senate District 26 to talk about. We've got some fun debates about some topics. Chris and John are going to go head to head. I'm pretty excited about that. So we got some juicy stuff to cover this week. You want to talk 2026? At least let me get through April 1st, the consolidated races. Ideally, I think Patrick would agree. Let us get through the budget process and all the Springfield nonsense. And then come June, we can dive into the 2026 elections. But sheesh, guys, take things one at a time if you could. With that, with our packed agenda, I want to introduce our excellent guest this week. We've got Kyle Moore. He's a state representative for the 99th district and was the mayor of Quincy for a good period of time. Kyle, glad you're with us.
Good to be on. I'm excited about this.
We'll see if you're still excited by the end, my friends. We also have with us returning guest Patrick Pfingsten. He's the founder, editor, and producer of the Illinoize. He also hosts the morning show on WMAY News and has a new podcast called the Ground Game Podcast. So Patrick basically doesn't sleep, and that's before you account for the baby and the little one at home. So Patrick, if you stay awake for this whole podcast, I'll be pleased.
Lots of caffeine. We're hanging in there. For the record, the first two candidates for governor in 2021 announced about this time in February, Paul Schimpf and Darren Bailey. So it's not that far off from where we've been in the past.
And maybe I'm just getting old and too tired for this crap. I don't know. Our other guest is John Lopez. He's been a super watcher of our podcast, sending tons of information our way over the last year and a half. And so we finally have him officially on to share his thoughts. I'm pretty pumped about that. He's a policy expert, reporter, and a content contributor. Also, you'll find him on X pretty frequently. John, what's going on?
Hey, hello, Collin and company. It's an honor to be here and look forward to contributing and exchanging information and discussing as gentlemen and as gentlemen would the issues and not the politics. I like to get past the talking points, get past the narratives, the platitudes and the bromides. So let's get into it.
And a group full of politicos, I think we'll probably do a little bit of both, but we're not going to be able to avoid the politics on this show. But I do like your perspective. Speaking of politics, we've got political experts Michael and Chris. I don't know what Michael's doing over there, shoving stuff in his mouth before his intro, but he's got a nice new fade, a nice new haircut, looking kind of sexy. I like that, Michael.
Yeah, I got a haircut this morning, so looking fresh for the podcast.
Look at that. He actually looks respectable for once. And Chris, you look semi-decent too.
I need a haircut. I'm discombobulated as you can. I'm disheveled. So I need to get into the barber shop. But my barber's been in and out of the doctor's office, so it's been difficult. So
how many times have you given him COVID? Be nice to the guy.
I've never gotten COVID a day in my life, Colin.
All right. Well, speaking of infectious diseases, let's talk about JB Pritzker's budget. I think that's a pretty good segue. So we're going to, over the next four agenda items, we're going to dissect Pritzker's budget address and the budget that he's proposing from a number of different angles. We'll first start with this, just the basics. We're talking about a $55.2 billion budget. Some people say 55.4, to be honest. I think it's 55.2, but whatever, it's somewhere in that range. And it obviously has continued to increase spending, something that's been a trend while J.B. Pritzker has been governor of Illinois. I want to start with you, Kyle, on this, because obviously you were in the room. The rest of us are just pretending. So certainly we'd be mistaken if we don't let you get the first word here. I know in your statement that you put out, you talked about how you were disappointed with this and you said it wasn't fiscally sound. What makes you say that?
Well, I've always believed that budgets should, spend no more than what they take in, but also that our expenses shouldn't grow at a faster pace than our revenues. When you do that, you're setting up future General Assemblies, future generations for tougher and tougher decisions. And certainly I put together budgets as mayor of the city of Quincy that try to keep that in mind. I always try to say, let's make life easier for the future generations. And here we have a budget where expenses grow at a faster pace than revenues by about 1%. And I know we're going to talk about revenues later, but there's some revenue games that are being played. We all were kind of wondering how the governor was going to do a workaround on some of the interviews that he'd given the last few weeks. First he started off by saying, that taxes were going to be off the table, and then it was last resort, but that there were going to be some spending cuts. But we all knew that the budget was going to grow. And here we have since 2019, I believe the state budget's grown by $15 billion. And, it's always going to be the largest budget in our state's history. But we just don't see any fiscal constraint, especially when some of the economic forecasts that are coming out of the governor's own staff is going to be that we're not going to have as good of an economy in the next few years that we've had previously.
Well, Patrick, I know I don't like to, do this interview style, but I do just quickly want to go to you because I do want to give you kudos. You had a great interview with Tom Demmer, which I watched, recapping what you guys saw in that budget address, and you covered the fact that spending since even Demmer started in office, let alone since Pritzker started in office, has been exploding in the state. And so I just want to pass it to you for your thoughts on this.
Well, I do think the revenue part is interesting. And the 55.2 is the expenditure, 55.4 is the revenue projection for the new budget. We were all going based on this assumption that FY26 was set with this $3.2 billion deficit based on an S&P sort of report and projection from November. I understand that it's not always the most perfect, most accurate projection, but certainly if somebody says, especially with the heft of S&P, that you're going to have a $3+ billion budget deficit, you're usually sounding the alarms. And Democrats really played it down since then. I've even had members of the legislature say, "Yeah, I don't believe that," which is interesting to say. And then we find out Tuesday night. It starts to drip out a little bit that, oh, there's more revenue than we thought there was, and it's not so bad. And then we find out Wednesday morning that it's a 1.7 billion deficit, which is still nothing to sneeze at, and still in the process, even with that sort of projected deficit, with new Gombe numbers, they still increase spending by $2 billion. So I know I've got my cynical pants on with where this money came from, but there are certainly questions as to where they reached this new revenue estimate, which they haven't really detailed, and I'm certainly interested to see if it's going to hold up.
Yeah, and next topic we're going to really dive into the revenue side, and those are solid points. I got to find this, but Lane, I'll get this to you, and we'll put it up on screen and post. Just the spending year per year, because it's one thing to look at just how that spending was fairly flat in the years leading up to JB Pritzker, and then when Pritzker took office, it has been at a significant upward tilt. And yes, some of that was that we had the COVID funds coming in, but here we don't have those federal funds coming in, and we're continuing, as Patrick said, to increase spending. And so that's, when we talk about having, we're balancing the budget. Pritzker likes to say how balanced his budgets always are. But you look at what the future is going to hold, the way the spending keeps going up. I don't know how that this is ever going to be a sustainable situation. Just some things we point to. You talk about this not being sustainable. The state of Illinois economic forecast came out in the last week, written by Moody's and posted on economy.com. And it talked about a number of what it's seeing, like the job market just finally surpassed the pre-pandemic level of employment around the country. They did that a long time ago. Talked about how the pace of job and income growth has slowed below the average Midwestern pace. It says that our unemployment is highest in the region and highest among the highest in the country. Says that Chicago's economy is trailing its large peers across the country. It says, if you go down and it talks about every region of the state, other than Pfingstenville in the Champaign area, it has doom and gloom about every other region's economy in the state. This is our economic forecast. And so, I know a lot of us have talked about this in the past, but you look at those indicators on what the future might hold, and sure, you might be able to duct tape this budget together, which is essentially what we're looking at here. But what does the future hold when we're looking at a horrible economic climate, when you see that kids are coming here to get educated at our excellent institutions and then leaving, they're not staying, when you see that businesses like, New York Stock Exchange is taking the NYSE Chicago out and putting it over in Texas. We're seeing businesses flee. We're seeing people flee. This is not sustainable. You can't keep increasing spending while our economic base keeps narrowing. It doesn't work.
Well, Colin, even I sat through a revenue presentation today in committee, and just the top line from the governor's own staff said that they expected that the feds would cut rates twice in the upcoming year, which means that our economy would be soft. It also said that we'd see a high spike in the unemployment rate. So if you take those combined, it means that then you would think then that your tax revenue are going to not come in as strong as they should, or certainly increase at the rate that they say, because you're going to have a soft economy, at least for the next 6 months, from their very own presentation that I heard this morning.
Yeah, fair. We're talking spending. Let's talk about the one area that Pritzker very publicly did cut. There is, at least for now, I think a lot of people think that this is going to be added back in, especially when the Latino caucus has their way. But what was cut, at least in Pritzker's budget proposal, was the funding for healthcare for non-citizens aged 42 to 64. This is something that Republicans have been talking about a lot. Now, Republicans talk about funding for healthcare for all non-citizens, but what Pritzker did cut was that segment between 42 and 64, which did lower the budget, reduce his budget proposal by what I think is about $500 million. But there's still health insurance for non-citizens. I think Demmer said in your interview, Patrick, that that's about 120, $130 million that's still in there. And there's a lot of people who believe this $400 to $500 million for the 42 to 64-year-old age is going to find its way somehow back in this budget if Pritzker's going to get the votes he needs to actually pass this thing.
Yeah, there were two specific Medicaid style health insurance. So let's be clear that it's not this gold plated Cadillac health insurance that some Republicans have been alleging. It's a Medicaid style program, and you can argue about whether those people are just going to wind up in the hospitals anyway, and we're going to end up footing the bill. That's certainly an argument that can be made. The reality is the governor needs credit to buck his own party, at least in this budget proposal, to say we can't afford this. You know, even the governor's progressive bones want to give everything to everyone when he can, and he's cutting $500 million here, and I think he deserves a little bit of credit for that. I think there's going to be people that will tell you the senior citizen one is a little more of a humanitarian side of things, but yeah, there's going to be pushback, right? In the Latino caucus, you already saw Karina Villa, who's I think is she the chair of the Latino caucus this time around?
I don't
or at least the Joint Latino Caucus, essentially said after the speech that, yeah, we're going to try and claw that back in. The question is, where I have little doubt that Don Harmon would be willing to stick his foot in the door and stop that from getting slipped back in, but I have no idea what to expect with the House. I mean, it is such a crapshoot going into this cycle.
You know, I always love pointing out Pritzker's hypocrisy, and we're on our first topic, and I get to do it because when asked about this, when a reporter asked him why he cut this, let me read you the quote because it's what Republicans have been saying since day one when this was instituted years ago. Here's Pritzker's quote. I'm reading. These are people who are working age and have the ability in many cases to get a job that has health care associated with it already. And so we have people that were on the program that went off the program as a result of getting a better job. These younger folks are able so far to buy coverage are also able so far to buy coverage on the ACA marketplace.
Which
so
they're not. Illegal immigrants cannot buy on the ACA.
I'm only reading
not true.
That's fine.
Not true.
Okay, thank you. I'm reading what he said. And the point is simply that Pritzker's using Republican talking points essentially here when we've been saying for years we didn't need to be spending this money. And here's Pritzker saying we didn't need to be spending this money. Of course, he's not going to be called out on it, but ultimately he's admitting this money never actually needed to be spent. These are working age individuals who could have gotten health care elsewhere, and yet here taxpayers, Illinois taxpayers, were footing the bill for it. Senate Republicans especially have been screaming about this, and rightfully so, when even Pritzker admits their talking points that these people could have gotten insurance elsewhere. All right, let's go to the next topic, which is what Patrick kind of alluded to. This $3.2 billion deficit we've been hearing over and over has curiously disappeared. And what I don't understand is they've said they found, I mean, Patrick, you said like 1.7 now is the new budget hole. I've heard estimates 1.2, 1.5, 1.7. I don't know what it is, but we do know they're filling it with $500 million in budget gimmicks. So where the other $1+ billion is coming from, I don't know. And as you said, Patrick, how they just arrived at these new estimates that are $1.5 billion more rosy, especially in Kyle's point about there's concerns about the economy in the next year. Who knows? There's a lot of gimmicks going on here to make this budget balanced, and lots of people, rightfully so, have questions.
Colin, I've got my list in front of you, in front of me, so it can clarify some of this. And two things that I think that we can really hit home on is first, they're taking money out of the road fund, a mandated 1% increase. It's about $171 million, and we're talking about conservative principles as taking care of infrastructure first, and that's infrastructure that that we're not going to get because of this budget. And then they have a delinquent tax program that is essentially taking money away from future budgets to a tune of about $200 million. And so when we're talking about digging ourselves a bigger hole in the future, that's one of them. And again, we asked this morning about, is it going to mean less tax payments in the future? And certainly, nobody really knows how much less we would get in the future, but they did say, yes, that we are giving up some money in the future by collecting that today.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Chicago do that a lot to try to fill. These are these one-time revenue, hits, and I think that's a concern. Whether you like or dislike some of these, like taking money out of the road fund, certainly don't like because you're going to have to pay that back. You talked about the delinquent tax program. You look at, raising these sin taxes, like on the casinos and on cannabis industry, and that's where the governor likes to go first, right? Those tax increases that are, easier to sell. But the question here is, when you look at these one-time revenue increases, what does this mean for next year? I mean, those Gambi's budget projections were, yes, a $3.2 billion deficit this year, but then what was it, like 4.2 the year after that? I mean, it kept growing. So we're not filling this with long-term reforms of either cutting spending or raising revenue. These are one-time things. And so what happens next year when this deficit is even bigger? It fuels the fire to maybe Pritzker's just trying to make it to the end of his term and he doesn't care, because this does not solve the long-term problem we have of spending more than we take in the state.
Yeah, well, it's clear they don't want to make the tough decisions or tough calls, right? It's all about kicking the can down the road, and maybe the next administration or the next General Assembly can deal with it. And we've seen, last budget and this budget, they like to kind of nibble around the edges and, we'll raise the gambling tax, or we'll raise the cigarette tax, or we'll raise the cigar tax, and they get, a little money here and there based off of that. But you can only do so much of that, right? And there's going to come a day where they're going to actually have to make some tough decisions. And as of right now, it does not seem like there's an appetite to do so.
Yeah. Know how 150 feels about this, and just what the governor promised 150 to not raise a stink, because they're one of the strongest unions down in Springfield, and so far they've been quiet about this money being moved from the road fund. In previous years, if anybody even hinted to move money out of the road fund, 150 would have literally decapitated them on the streets. So I'm curious where that's going to go. I mean, there's a big fight right now between hemp and cannabis, and this raises taxes $20 million in the cannabis industry. Curious what that's going to do. And then we're talking about another $100 million from 15 out of the 16 casinos. Of course, not the Chicago casino, but the other 15, we can charge them a little bit more. There's just a lot of ridiculous going on here.
Well, Colin,
Or as I like to use in my what's his name, the commentator on TNT for basketball, Charles Barkley, in my Barkley voice, it's ridiculous.
Well, Colin, the thing about the Chicago casino is that nobody goes there. So if you tax it anymore, then you're going to have negative people going to the Chicago casino at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, I get why you wouldn't want to raise taxes on them, but still, again, it's you're picking winners and losers yet again. All right, let's move on to our next topic here, which is the praise that I've seen for this budget not having tax hikes is significantly premature. There are people who have said that Pritzker's game, the one that Kyle just talked about a little bit ago, where he said no new taxes, and then he came out a few days later going, well, taxes as a last resort, were to essentially set this up for Pritzker to just reluctantly go along when the legislature wants to raise some taxes. And it seems like this budget is doing that same thing, because saying there's going to be no new taxes here, I thought, again, Demmer made a great point on your interview, Patrick, which is there are still bills that are going to be passed that will have a fiscal year impact, so that has to be accounted for. This budget doesn't account for any fix to the tier 2 pension problem, which we've been told multiple times is going to happen this session. We've got the Chicagoland transit situation, which could cost up to $1 billion. Where's the money going to come from that? We've got CPS in Chicago looking for some sort of a bailout. It was just in the Tribune, what I think yesterday, where Johnson's trying to get the Chicago public schools to somehow try to sneak one of their payments onto the state's pension payment so that they could, pay some of Chicago's costs. There's a lot of work to be done here with additional costs coming in. So to say that there are no tax hikes, this is just the starting point of the budget negotiation process. There will be more spending added to this, and we already know there's spending coming. So this talk about no new tax hikes, it's just February, y'all.
To give the governor credit, which I hate that you guys try and make me look like the Pritzker defender at all times, but he did say in this speech very publicly that if you want to spend more on something, you need to identify a cut. And that's the first time he's ever said something like that. So I do believe he deserves
if he
credit
holds
for
to that, I will give him kudos as well.
Sure, and there will be huge pressures among the General Assembly to spend more and raise some sort of tax. Maybe it's the corporate income tax, something like that. And I think you're going to see this real problem for legislative leaders, specifically Welch, because Harman has done a pretty good job of keeping his members in line for whatever they hammer out between Harman and Sims and the governor's office and the House side. They've generally kept Senate Democrats in line. House Democrats are just a complete crapshoot. I use this analogy all the time. I saw John Boehner speak one time many years ago, and he said being speaker was keeping 218 frogs in a wheelbarrow. Speaker Welch is like keeping 78 feral cats in a box. I mean, it's insane how many pressures they're going to have inside of that caucus. So yeah, there will absolutely be pressure. We're going to hear plenty over things we want to spend more on, things they believe are priorities, things that will help people. So this is the grown-up year, right? The grown-ups have to show up this year. And if the governor's for real about it, good for him. I think the Senate president's generally shown he's for real. We'll see if the speaker can step up. I think there are a lot of opportunities here for the grown-ups to come to the table.
I think what you're going to see, honestly, is that it's a waiting game to see what happens out of DC, to see if any funds are cut that are meant to go to Illinois for whatever reason, and they're just biding the time. I think they're going to look at this cut, that's cut, and it's all set up for when Trump and Doge starts executing real cuts. Got to be legal, but I think that's what they're going to wait for, and that's where I think at this point the governor's biding his time. If he goes all the way through the end of session and approved budget, and he doesn't blame Washington for having to increase spending, then I'll give the kudos as well.
Yeah, I mean, John, I've also heard that they're waiting until DC makes a cut that impacts the Illinois budget so that they can say, well, we had to raise taxes because Trump. And so waiting for that cover from DC so that they could then say, well, we didn't want to raise taxes, but it's Donald Trump's fault and the Republicans in DC's fault. They made us do it. I've also heard that. Again, February's early. This budget's not going to be passed until 3 or 4 a.m. someday in late May or early June. So this idea that, it's going to change a lot over the next couple of months.
Well, and think about Medicaid, right? There's a potential for 900,000 people to get bounced from Illinois' rolls if the federal government hacks what is being projected out there. Who's going to pay for that if they're going to try and keep them back on the rolls? It would be the state. So there are already huge pressures out there potentially dangling over this budget from DC.
Yeah. And we're also talking about like what revenues could they look at. Just going to pass a couple things that have come out in the last week, just as we're talking about this. So Scott Holland talked about online gambling, that the state, this is something the state does tend to look at. How can they look at gaming or gambling to bring in some revenues? And, online gaming and gambling has been gaining steam. So maybe that's one place they look for some revenue. Rob Martwick, as he always does, filed his progressive tax bill. This time it's Senate Joint Resolution Constitutional Amendment number 4. Curtis Tarver Schumer filed his millionaire's tax bill in the House. That one's Constitutional Amendment number 8. So these are certainly some things that members of the legislature could start to push forward as revenue options. And again, that's what Pritzker sort of set this up for of, all right, you want X added back. Where's the money going to come from for it? I know he said, what spending cuts will you look for? But certainly we could expect progressive Democrats to instead substitute revenue enhancements instead. All right, last topic on the budget before we move on to other juicy topics. So, Lane Davis, our producer, caught this. I give him credit for that because I didn't catch it. Rachel Maddow opened her show with basically 3 minutes of video from Pritzker's address, calling it inspirational. And essentially, especially the last portion of his speech was pretty much just targeting national progressive people. I mean, a lot of Republicans in the state got very angry over the references to Hitler and Nazis, and rightfully so. But this was a national speech, especially towards the end. And proving Godwin's law is always true, that you always eventually, if you talk enough, especially online, you eventually end up at Hitler and the Nazis. Here Pritzker is in a state of the state and budget address invoking Hitler and the Nazis. It was a bit much, and including even people on the left who said it was a bit much. So it wasn't just the right that took that in a pretty negative light. Again, Kyle, you were there. What was sort of the mood and all that?
Well, let me tell you, I've being a former mayor, put together state of the city addresses, and you always, as the top official, you outline what your priorities are going to be the next year, but you try to make it aspirational. You try to say we're all in this together, and we're going to continue the great legacy of our city, our state, our nation, so on and so forth. And after the speech was done, we all expected there was going to be anti-Trump rhetoric in the speech. We know that Pritzker has aspirations to be a player on the national stage, and we understand that. And so I came expecting that. But as he was going through the speech, I kept waiting on him to pivot to that positive, hey, we have some tough choices to make, and so we can all do this together. And it just died with a thud. And, when the speech ended, we all kind of looked at each other and was like, did that just happen? It was kind of disbelief and quite frankly, disappointment because, we work with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle every day, and they always talk about working together. And it's very hard to work together in an environment where you just got compared to Hitler. And so I just think it was disappointment across the board from my Republican colleagues and certainly myself.
Well, especially since just before then, when Pritzker gave that line that Patrick talked about if you've got things you want to add to the budget, tell me where you're going to cut, a number of Republicans cheered him. I mean, you actually saw a moment of bipartisanship on the floor, which, I don't know when the last time is that we saw that. So this is part of my frustration, and I know, Patrick, you and I have talked about this. My frustration with Pritzker is if he were to move on from his national aspirations, he actually has the potential to be an incredible governor. There are moments where he comes through and you're like, wow, he actually could be a great governor, and then he flips the switch and goes back to the national BS, and that's just where this whole thing ended up.
Yeah, and after he won in 2022, I wrote a column. I said, please move to the center, Governor. Please govern more like Jim Edgar, and that's how you build a legacy in this state. People like me still slobber over Jim Edgar and will until he's not taking my calls anymore. Listen, we knew that Pritzker wanted to make a play to the MSNBC crowd going into the speech. We knew there was going to be something. It was, and you guys know, I'm the loudest anti-Trump conservative voice in the state. Maybe Pat Brady's is a little louder. Don't talk, Chris. There are a few louder than me that have talked about the problems with Trump, the flirtations with authoritarianism, the lack of substance, the lack of conservatism from him. To go out and call every Republican a Nazi is straight bullshit. And Pritzker and his team should know better. And they knew they were just fanning the flames. And that doesn't help anybody. I keep talking about the grown-ups, and that was not a grown-up move. That was a play to the far left of his own party in a desperate attempt to get on the stage in 2028. He's so much better than this. At least he should be so much better than this. And there are some really really frustrating Republicans in that caucus. And Kyle's going to probably learn that after he's there more than 6 weeks. But what good does it do for JB Pritzker to point out the Chris Millers of the world? Right? It doesn't do him any good. He's playing ball in a different stratosphere than the Freedom Club. So what's the point? It made no sense for him to go down that road.
Yeah, and ultimately go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I'm very interested to see if this is going to move JB from 2% in these hypothetical national Democratic primary polls to maybe 2.5%, 3%, 4% perhaps. I mean, that would be a big jump for JB because currently he's at the bottom of all these polls. Now, granted, most people have no idea who JB Pritzker is, and money can buy a lot of things. But let us remember who JB Pritzker is and whether or not that's actually going to benefit him in a Democratic primary. He is a white, rich Jewish billionaire. That is not what the Democratic Party wants. It's not what the far left of the Democratic Party wants. I don't care how much money he's got. Last time this was tried, it was called Mike Bloomberg. Mike Bloomberg, I believe, won American Samoa's primary. We all know how that went. So I don't care what JB Pritzker's audience is for this speech. I'd be shocked if it even moved him up to 4% in the national.
You know, if he decides to go back to this well again, I'd love to see somebody do a little digging and fact checking. Because Sharon Linglock Johnson, who's been on our podcast a few times, posted because she was really angry about this because she was around during those Nazi protests in Skokie, and she said Pritzker wasn't here. He didn't even live in Illinois at the time. So it's only what she said on Facebook. So I don't know what's true or what's not. But if Pritzker's going to keep going to this well, I'd love to know if it's even accurate. It talks about how he funded the Holocaust Museum when it was thousands of donors who funded that. I mean, it's just taking credit for a lot of people's hard work in the Jewish community didn't necessarily come across well to a lot of my Jewish friends as well. So there was a lot there that, it got him on Rachel Maddow, but it didn't necessarily play super great with people in the state of Illinois, not just Republicans with the Nazi stuff, but also just to the Jewish community as well.
And Collin, can I share with you? I was walking back after the speech, and we were just talking about how, after the election, Democrats said they needed to learn lessons of why Trump won and talking about Midwest values and kitchen table issues that you guys talk about on your show so much. And listening to that speech, there's nobody that's working a 9 to 5 that wants to hear that kind of speech. They want to hear how you're going to make their life better. And so I thought it was totally tone deaf of what just happened in our national election. I was rather surprised by that because I thought surely they would take some lessons and pivot their message.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Though in Illinois politics, we tend to like to fail upwards. So, maybe that's just the trend that continues. But, you also saw the continuation of Pritzker trying to use a turn of phrase to attack the people on the right who have been pointing out the very real fiscal problems in the state. So his latest phrase is calling them the backseat bellyachers. If you remember in the past, he's called them carnival barkers. It's probably us too. Carnival barkers, spelunkers of misery, doom grifters. Now backseat bellyachers has been added to that list. I know, Patrick, you were tweeting some of that stuff. And, again, it's a sign of just the unseriousness of this governor and the lack of willingness to work with the other side, especially when over the last 6 months, a lot of that doom and gloom that we've been talking about has been proven to be true. Now, we were basing that on facts even before, but now even Pritzker's own people have had to admit in certain instances that the things that we were saying are actually accurate. So those doom grifters that he likes to attack actually had some pretty good points, and yet he doubles down, triples down, quadruples down with, these personal attacks. And this is what we saw on the national stage. Pritzker was the leader on sort of the name calling of politics, saying, I hate it when, Trump gets all juvenile and name calls, but then Pritzker was doing it, and it was proven that he was the one doing it the most on the campaign trail during that last presidential election, using name calling. He's going right back to that, playing again to that far left social media, TikTok style crowd, instead of being a leader in the room and an actual adult who wants to get things done.
It's almost like he hasn't accepted what happened nationwide on November 5th. I mean, sweeping the battleground states that President Trump did, he's in denial. And he still use these juvenile names. And look, govern. You do best for yourself by just getting over the finish line with a budget and keeping that no new taxes pledge. That's the kind of new Democrat I think Democrats would want to go for if he can prove himself instead of name calling and trying to get on Rachel Maddow every other day.
See, I don't agree with that. I think they got the message, right? That I mean, if they really thought that the progressive way continued past November, we would have seen the health insurance for undocumented immigrants not only kept but expanded. We would have seen another whack at the progressive tax already out there and moving, some sort of millionaire surcharge out there. There would have been further moves to levy. I think they got the message. It's just this is a very you've got this contention inside Team Pritzker that they want to be this progressive bulwark, and they want to they want to make a splash on the national level because they don't see in their eyes any other Democrats stepping up. After the fires, Gavin Newsom has disappeared. Josh Shapiro's kind of just calling basketball games instead of out there on the national scene. There's no Democrats stepping up. So this is their way of trying to fill that vacuum. It's just, and because Republicans are in such a bad spot in Springfield, because they have no influence, no power, no ability to do anything other than show up, they're easy for him to slap around, and he doesn't care what they think.
True. Listen, Patrick, I get your point that they've gotten the message. My question would be, did they get the right message? Because to John's point, Gallup came out just a couple days ago with a poll that Democratic voters want their party to moderate. Since the last time that they took this poll in 2021, among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, the 45% want the party to become more moderate. That's a movement of 11 points since the last time they tested that 4 years ago. Meanwhile, only 29% want them to become more liberal. Now I know that that's getting independent Democrats all the way to far left Democrats. I certainly get that. But ultimately, there is a lot of angst in the Democratic Party over how far left they've gone. And you're seeing more and more of these polls come out that they're saying, you know what, maybe we do need to actually go a little bit more towards the center, when at the same time Pritzker is going further to the left. Now, I know Patrick and Chris will tell me, and they're right, that to win a primary, you have to go to the far left. But ultimately, the party, a lot of voters are saying, we're going to need to, we've taken it too far. It's time to go a little bit back towards the middle. Polling is showing that. This Gallup poll was pretty telling. I'll have Lane bring up some of the images on screen as we're talking here.
Well, just to add, though, the Gallup polling is saying one thing, but the newly minted Democratic National Committee Chair, Ken Martin, is saying something else. If any of y'all read his memo from this past Tuesday, as far as basically they haven't gotten the message because they still want to go hard left. And we'll talk about that a little bit later because he focused on the working class in this country. But still, I mean, if you read his memo, you almost see that's where Governor Pritzker got his speech from. If you haven't read it, please do, because it's a gold mine to see they haven't learned their lesson.
Well, just
Michael, close this out, buddy.
Yeah, just one comment, kind of backtrack a little bit to the backseat bellyachers or whatever he called us. I mean, we talked about it on this episode when we were covering the budget issues. We've talked about it on previous episodes about the problems that we have in this state and how we compare, to our neighbors and other states across this country. We've got a lot of problems. And like the House Republicans and the Freedom Caucus members have been pointing out some of those problems. Pritzker is either, in denial that those are actually problems, or he's just gaslighting us, which could very well be the truth. Like, we don't have to agree on the solutions, but we can't deny that the problems exist. And that's what he's doing.
Well, that's what Lou Sandoval from the chamber said about Pritzker, that he's been gaslighting us. And that's pretty strong language coming from, the head of the chamber, which the chamber tends to be a little bit less partisan. So that tells you something. All right, let's move on to our next topic. We're going to talk about Senate District 26. The appointment's been made, and we have a new state senator who will be sworn in, Darby Hills. We're going to talk about this in two parts. First, we're going to talk about the actual appointment. There's a whole process. There's lots of drama here. There's lots of intrigue. So we're going to talk about the appointment, and then there is a bit of a legal situation going on with the appointment as well. So we're going to talk about those two things separate within this agenda item, just so everybody's aware. So let me lay the groundwork here, because there's been some reporting on the situation, and a lot of the reporting has missed one thing or another. And so I want to just get all the details out there so people know what we're talking about here, because everyone likes to share their opinion, and in most cases, especially on Facebook, it's way off base. So let's get the facts out there first, which is this. Senator Dan McConchie announced his retirement. He had his chosen replacement, which was Joe Selby. That's who he wanted. He came out publicly and endorsed Joe Selby. Immediately, a number of people freaked out because Marty McLaughlin also wanted it, and people saw this as an opportunity to attack Kathy Selvey for that seat. As I reported a couple weeks ago, Kathy actually did not campaign for her son. She purposely stayed out of it, but that still didn't matter. The people who hate Kathy Selvey use it as an excuse to attack her and go after her. Not my fight, not my battle. Even Dan McConchie didn't actually push Joe Selvey that much because many people don't know, but Dan's going through something personal with his family. He's in our thoughts and prayers. It's really tough for him and the family, and so he hasn't been super involved even in that replacement process. It was Lynn O'Brien who was sort of orchestrating this behind the scenes, and yet people were attacking McConchie, they were attacking Kathy Selvey, they were attacking the committee and Keith Brin, and that's what Marty McLaughlin and his allies did. So they, in an effort to push Selvey out, started a huge online campaign to attack Selvey, Kathy Selvey, Joe Selvey, Dan McConchie, Keith Brin, the whole committee. They just kept throwing bombs and bombs and bombs, both privately and publicly. It worked and it didn't work. So in the one sense it worked, it kept Joe Selvey from actually putting his name in. He withdrew from consideration, never actually even put in for the seat. Where it didn't work is it angered a whole lot of people because he was attacking the committee with no basis, no grounds for attacking the committee. He was attacking Kathy Selvey, despite the fact that she was actually trying to stay out of it. He was attacking Dan McConchie, who had a lot of stuff he was dealing with separately. A lot of bombs were thrown, and there was a lot of collateral damage as a result. While this was going on, a lot of people were looking at who our candidates were. Our options at that point were Joe Selvey and Marty McLaughlin. And many of us, including people like me who like Marty McLaughlin, were saying that neither of those two candidates were going to hold on to Senate District 26 in 2026. The reality is that is going to be an incredibly difficult district to hold on to. And Marty has not shown electorally that he has the ability to win a district like that. He's in the more Republican half of that district, and he barely held on, didn't raise much money, barely knocks on doors. Listen, I defend the guy. You can check the tape. I was the loudest voice for saying that Tony McCombie and the House Republicans should have been backing him up in his last race. So this isn't me attacking the guy. I'm simply saying the reality. And even the people that he put on his endorsement list, many of them said privately, listen, we have to back the guy because he's a friend, but even we admit he'll never win that Senate seat. So a lot of people
he won re-election by 47 votes in the Republican half of the Senate district.
Yeah, some of us trusted the plan, Patrick. That's why.
So a lot of people were looking at, is there a better option? I will say, I have a friend, Karen Darch, the mayor of Barrington, who we've run her races, who I did call and say, please, please, please run for this. Dan McConchie has been begging her for a decade to run for office. Other people have been begging her. She's a rock star. She polls in the upper 70s in that region. If she would have put her name in, she could have been that tier one candidate we needed to absolutely hold on to Senate District 26. I know people were talking to people like Donna Johnson, African-American mayor of Libertyville, who could have done an awesome job, but she's stuck in a tough re-election fight in her city right now, trying to hold off the Democrats in Libertyville. So she wasn't able to do it. There was a push to say, is there someone who could do this? We weren't able to find any candidate at that level who was, publicly out there, who could have held on to the seat and, really made it a great case. So a lot of people said, all right, it's either Joe or Marty. It is what it is. One of them's going to get it. One of them's going to lose. I guess we just move on. Then Joe didn't put in. So it was Marty's to lose. And at that point, it was officially Marty's to lose. Here's the unfortunate reality that people are just unwilling to accept. It was Marty's to lose, and he went out and lost it. In the time after Joe Selvey did not put in, he continued. He doubled down on attacking the committee, on attacking McConchie, on attacking the Selveys. His people continued to say stuff and attack people both publicly and privately. It continued that sort of leaving a really bad taste in everybody's mouth. In the meantime, 3 other candidates who weren't McLaughlin also put their names in. So a lot of people said, all right, let's talk to the other 3. If Marty hasn't learned his lesson and if he's not ready to go win this seat, we got to find somebody who could. And so people went out and interviewed those 3. I know John Curran, the Senate Republicans, did so. They identified Darby Hills, and they said, you know what? We're going to get behind Darby Hills. Dan McConchie did the same thing. McConchie, the senator who left the seat, also supported Darby Hills for the seat. So these people who say that it was Brin or some sort of deal, absolutely not true. And in fact, from Brin's perspective, I know, because he's my friend and I asked him, he said he was not committed. Up until the interviews, he was not committed. He told everybody, both publicly and privately, that those interviews were going to take the day. Even when Joe Selvey was putting in for it, Keith said he did not commit to Dan McConchie, and Dan McConchie agrees that Keith did not commit. Keith said, I want to see how he does in his interview. He's been saying for weeks that whoever does better in the interview is going to get his vote because Keith's the chairman. He's got to represent that district. And if the Republican loses it, it's going to be around Keith's neck for losing that district. So he said someone needs to go in that meeting from these interviews and wow us. Well, that's what he put out. Marty continued to say the cake is baked and it's already been decided, when that's absolutely not true. So the interviews come around, and everyone agreed during the interviews that Marty was hostile. He did not do well in the interview. In fact, even the people on Tom DeVore's Facebook page who were commenting, even they admitted that Darby Hills won the interview. Even people, the other committee or people on that committee who watched the interviews, they were pushing back on some of the answers that Marty was getting, and saying that's not actually true, Marty, because they asked him, what are you going to do work with people, because you're not doing a great job of that down in Springfield right now. How will you change that? Will you do a better job in on the Senate if you flip houses? And instead of saying, I want to work with people, Marty's like, well, I speak truth to power, and some people don't like that. Not my problem. A lot of answers like that where people are like, dude, you can't, this doesn't work. You got to work with people. They asked him, hey, your portion of the district's more Republican. What are you going to do to win the full district? I'm going to run a social media campaign. That's going to do it. It's completely disconnected from reality. They said, hey, how are you going to raise money? Because in every election prior, you've never raised more than $100,000, and this is going to be a multi-million-dollar race. And he said, well, I've always raised a lot of money, and I'll just raise what I need, and I only needed $100,000. Not convincing to people who have seen his track record of not raising money. And so all throughout, he was hostile, he was arrogant, I deserve this, he never once asked for their support or their vote, he demanded it. And so, coming out of it, they said, well, fine, you know what? The person who did the best in the interview was Darby. And by the way, they also agreed that this unknown dude out of Long Grove, who I don't even know, did the second best. Marty didn't even do the second best. He did the third best out of the four. So Darby Hills gets the appointment. Obviously, everybody's freaking out about it, but this was a fair and transparent process. None of us knew how Keith was going to vote. My wife will back me up. I was waiting. I was watching on my phone. I had no idea how Keith was going to vote, but he was true to his word. The person who did best in the interviews got the job, and here we are. So those are the details from when this seat became open to when it became filled. Sure, people have thoughts. Go ahead.
According to my reporting, if the cake were baked going into the selection on last Friday, and we're going to get into the procedural mess and all that, I'm sure. But if the cake were baked, it was for Marty, right? From my understanding, he was seen as the front runner going in. He just had to say the right things, do the right things, have the right plan, and be the Marty that we kind of thought he was 3-4 years ago. Pardon me for reading off my screen. People who were in the interview said he came across as arrogant, out of touch, and sure to lose the seat next year. That prompted Senate Republicans to go to the committee and say, we don't want this guy. That's a problem for anybody in that situation. And I don't know Darby Hills. I'd never heard of her until Friday, or whenever the names were released. Was that last Wednesday, last Thursday, whenever that was. So I don't know anything about her going in. So I was certainly surprised. But as we dug more into this, it certainly seems that this was McLaughlin who tripped on himself more than it was someone who came in and stole it from him.
Well, and ultimately, when Joe didn't put in, that was what we were all saying. Like, at that point, I was sort of done with it. I wanted Karen Darch. I couldn't get her in. I love her. Karen, I love you. Please, at some point, run. But at the end of the day, I was like, I didn't have a horse in the fight. We all just assumed it was going to be Marty. But as those conversations kept happening throughout that week, Marty kept reminding everybody that there was no growth there. I mean, Patrick, you said it. We love the guy. I work with him on a couple of his early races. But at this point, when the House caucus says they don't want you, and the Senate caucus says they don't want you, and even Barrington Hills, I mean, the elected officials locally in Barrington Hills, that many of them got elected with him, they don't work with Marty. It's this unfortunate trend where he is yet again one of those people who has unbelievable potential. Marty McLaughlin could do some amazing things. I don't know what's going on the last couple of years, but he can't seem to stop tripping over his own feet. And I don't want that to happen because he has incredible potential. But it's just, this is a trend. This is not recent. This has been going on. So people who are going publicly saying, and there's been some public posts, including John on McHenry County blog, there are some people like, Marty's had tons of tremendous amount of success. He underperformed in his House seat by several points. He's got his pack where he's run a bunch of candidates in McHenry County and in Cook County and Southwest Lake, most of which, if not all of which, have lost. trust. He barely won his seat. There isn't that massive track record of success that people are trying to claim here. And it's just for a race that's going to be a huge race in this region, you can't put all your eggs in a basket that you can't trust.
I think Marty.
Hold on, Chris, just real quick. I mentioned John. Let's let him go, and then you can go.
Thank you. Well, I get flashbacks to what happened in 2018 when a similar situation post primary, when then Senator Karen McConaughey resigned in the 33rd, and then you had to have this committee set up of just 2 county chairs, and they had to decide a successor. And Alan Skillicorn was a state rep for one half of that Senate district, and I don't think he came across as arrogant and brash. Just he had shown already he can't get things done in Springfield on his own. And so that's why Don DeWitt, the former mayor of St. Charles at the time, was tapped. Now, granted, the 33rd is not near the competitive seat that the 26th will be in next year, but that's how you came with Don DeWitt. And Don DeWitt, I think by anybody's account, is doing a solid job for what he can in the minority, in the super minority in the Senate. Marty McLaughlin basically repeated that history. In my opinion, he should have done better. Somebody should have prepped him. I don't know who he's listening to in his inner circle, but we all saw. The most vocal of the committee members was Kane County Republican Chair Andrew Larario. He was being honest. Granted, he was going by perception, which not necessarily reality. But still, he's saying that it was decided when they got in there, and that's just not true. As Collin, as you said, Chairman Brin out of Lake County. But the result's the same. And keep in mind, Andrew only has like 14 votes because the Kane County portion of that district is very small. But still, kept on the level, Darby won the interview. Darby won the selection on February the 14th. And I just had flashbacks to 2018 and Alan Skillicorn there.
That's a great analogy or a great comparison. Chris, go ahead.
My point is that I think Marty McLaughlin deserves a lot of credit, from plan trusters like myself, that he was able to pull off a victory that nobody, I don't care what Collin says, nobody really thought that he was going to pull off. The Democrats spent a gazillion dollars of abortion money against the man, and he went out there and said, yeah, I don't support abortion, even in cases of rape and incest. Get bent, Barrington, and he won anyway. And for that, I think the man deserves credit. At the same time, I don't think you can enter an appointment process like this and look at whose votes matter and how you think you're going to win a specific district, win an appointment process without going in, humble yourself, think about what it takes to win a Senate district, not a House district, and get that appointment the right way. The problem is, I think, is that Marty committed that no matter what happens with his appointment process is that he's running anyway. So he went in hostile takeover too. Mm-hmm. He says you can either appoint me or a year from now, you have to deal with the Republican primary aspect of this. And that's a decent threat. And in politics, threats have weight. But at the same time, is that good for the Republican Party? No, it's not. And look, if you want to see what's bad for the Republican Party, look at the comments on Tom DeVore's Facebook page. That's not good for the Republican Party. This whole thing is a mess. The Democrats have contentious appointments. There was one that happened in the Senate last year, turned into a disaster, and Natalie Toro ended up losing the primary a year later. But we don't need that in the Republican Party. We have enough problems if you're a Republican in the Republican Party. If you want an appointment, do the math, figure out what it takes to actually get that appointment, and don't go in there guns blazing and not have a plan to do so.
Well, that threat really did hurt him a lot. I mean, he was given multiple chances to step back from that threat, especially after Joe Selby didn't even put in and he wouldn't step back from the threat. And it was part of the consideration as well was, you're going to threaten this committee and not respect our choice. Then why are we even here? And again, it just didn't come across very well. And let's be real. You mentioned, Keith. As I said, I know Keith very well. People have tried to use that connection to say that there's something nefarious here. You guys got to know Keith Brin. This dude, if I were to ever tell him or ask him to vote a certain way, he would laugh in my face. We have a really good relationship, and it's one of which we respect each other's independence. Cora's gotten less business out of Lake County than we ever got before Keith Brin became chairman. In fact, we've gotten almost nothing compared to where we used to get tons of business out of Lake County before Keith was there. Because this dude, as annoying as it is is always looking for, how can I make sure I do this as above board as possible, never willing to do what a previous chairman did. All these people are complaining about Keith and saying there's some sort of relationship between him and us. They never complained when Mark Shaw was the Lake County chairman. And when Mark Shaw was chairman, he would meet with candidates and he would require that they hire Tom Mannix in his company. Otherwise, Shaw said, the party will not be with you. I won't be with you. That's what the previous chairman did, and sent hundreds of thousands of dollars to that competitor of ours from Lake County. Keith Bryn has sent us like a few tiny projects years ago, and that's it. We've done a bunch of free work to help him out because he's my buddy. That's it. There's no relationship there, no financial relationship there. We have no contracts with Darby or the Senate Republicans. People are just trying to make this stuff up because it fits their narrative, but the reality doesn't fit it. And these people, let's talk about them. These are the ones who are telling us who can win and who can lose. The loudest one, I've been wondering all week, would I use names or would I not? But since I believe we should come together, I won't use names. But the individual who's been the loudest on Facebook, who's attacking Keith and attacking us, this is somebody who ran for mayor of their town and lost by over 20 points, getting 4th out of 4 candidates. They ran for state rep, lost by over 20 points. They ran for county board, lost by over 20 points. Tom DeVore wants to tell us who's the best candidate for this seat. He lost this district by 6.5 points. Why is it all the time we get all this advice from people who just lose election after election, and they're like, this is what you need to do to win? Well, maybe go win an election first, and then come tell us what we need to do to actually win elections. Because when Dane McConchie, who, yes, he underperformed, but he at least held on to the seat by 0.4%. When Dane McConchie tells us that he thinks Darby Hills is the best choice, considering McConchie has won this seat before, that carries a little bit of weight. When people who have lost by significant margins in and around this district, that's not going to carry nearly as much weight. All right, let's talk about for a second Darby Hills, and then let's talk about the actual legal process of this. We haven't talked about Darby, so people don't know her a lot. And for those who are saying negative things about her, Chris talked about DeVore's Facebook comments. There's some nasty stuff being said about this lady, and people don't even know her. They've gone on her Facebook, they've seen that she's got photos with her family that are all, very Barrington looking, that she goes to events and wears fancy clothes, and like, oh, she must be a socialite. She must not be very smart. She won Mrs. Illinois, so clearly she just doesn't have any, a brains about her. But the reality is she was an attorney. She was a prosecutor in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. She runs a charity in Barrington that helps hundreds of kids in the schools in Barrington. Politically, she has been on the Barrington Hills Village Board, where she served on multiple committees, including serving as co-chairman of the Finance Committee, where she has crafted budgets that have lowered the property tax levy 3 years in a row. She was very involved with the Barrington 220 schools, pushing back when the progressives were trying to push their agenda in 220. She, again, as a prosecutor, she's got some tough on crime stances, especially when it comes to immigration and wasting our tax dollars on immigration. And politically, she did actually hold some coffees for people like McLaughlin and other candidates. She has been a little bit involved, not as much as some people would like to see. But what I always like to laugh at is these people who are saying hooray to Donald Trump, former Democrat, and how he's now, the head of everything that they believe. His cabinet right now is full of a bunch of former and even current Democrats, and they're perfectly okay with that. But now suddenly here's somebody who has never voted Democrat, has voted Republican, yes, back in 2012, but voted Republican just once, and suddenly they're freaking out. I mean, heck, even Tom DeVore, when he was registered to vote in, I think, 88? I've got it written down. He didn't participate in a Republican primary for a very long time. Hold on, I don't want to get it wrong because he's fairly litigious, and I don't want to say this wrong. Shoot. I must have deleted it. It was a number of years, I think like 20 years before he started participating in primaries. And I'm okay with that. Not everybody is political animals like the 6 of us, where we go to boring Republican chicken dinners and we participate as precinct committee people. I mean, heck, one of the main people posting on Facebook, different from the one before, just did an interview where she said it was COVID in 2020-ish, where she started paying attention and getting involved. And I applaud that. I think that's awesome. I think the fact that new people who haven't been showing up at every Republican function for 40 years want to get involved in the party, that's a positive thing. And when they have demonstrable results showing that they are tough on crime, on immigration, that they have lowered taxes, that they've cut spending, showed that they've pushed back on progressive policies locally, these are things that tell me that's a solid Republican. And yeah, okay, you haven't been involved in the party before, but I'm really glad you're coming to the scene. And this is somebody who can raise money, work hard, help us win that district. There's a lot to like in this candidate. And so, yes, obviously, I live here, so I care about the district. But even people outside the district have said, okay, yeah, we kind of get it. She's got some stuff you can work with to maybe put that seat in play.
Well, you've got things to work with, but there's also some realities too. She's never faced a contested election. She was appointed and then she won unopposed in 2 years ago for her trustee spot. And clearly not voting Republican since 2012. I understand the comparison there, but still, it's still something that Republican primary voters in March are going to care about. Next March is going to care about.
Yeah, certainly possible.
It certainly, I did listen to a late 2020 audio interview with her, and it was predominantly about COVID and trying to get through lockdowns and everything. Didn't mention the Republican Party once, but it wasn't a political interview. Didn't mention a few other things which might concern people. They're going to want to know more about Darby once the final appointment is truly made and she takes the oath of office. But that's just the first impression was someone's looking ahead to November 3rd, 2026, and facing State Rep Nabila Sayed for that Senate seat. Everybody's looking ahead to that matchup, and how is she going to match up against, okay, you have a lady in her late 40s, 3 teenage children, one's over 18, versus a 26-year-old, 2-term state representative who's won tough races both times and prevailed.
And raises a gigantic amount of money. Amount of money.
That too. So all that put together, people are looking ahead to November 3rd, 2026, and you got to win the seat. And I can understand where the Republican chairs are looking at this, the chairs and the township committee persons, and why Darby, and clearly her interview, she knocked it out of the park. So that's just my opening salvo, and I'll wait to hear from others.
Yeah. No, that's fair points. And listen, there's work to be done. I mean, again, looking at her Facebook, there's work to be done here. But as you said, these are people who are looking at 2026. How do we hold the seat? Dan McConchie, Senate Republicans, they want to hold that seat. They don't want to just cede it to Nabila Sayed and the Democrats. And so to them, it's who can give us the best possible chance? Who's a solid Republican who could give us the best possible chance in November of 2026? And there's a lot to work with to like in Darby Hills.
Collin, go ahead, Michael.
No, it's all right. I was just going to say, right now more than ever, we need some adult-like behavior, and that has been very lacking, especially since the November election. Like, there's an appointment process, like it played out the way that it played out. Like, odds are, most likely, she's going to be our candidate. Like, it's a competitive seat. Like, it's got to be all hands on deck to make sure that she retains it, and it's got to be all hands on deck to make sure that Marty retains his state rep seat. Like, it's just getting absurd. You get on Facebook, you see the comments, you see the post. It's like we're dealing with sophomores in high school, and calling them sophomores in high school is probably demeaning to sophomores in high school.
Especially because they're attacking her over her looks or like photo. It's like, you know what? Can we move past that? Like, if you have a problem with her, let's look at policy. Let's look at like what actually matters. But it's just juvenile, most of the attacks.
Collin, I was going to say that, in Quincy, I was a part of flipping the city council from Republican to Democrat after 68 years. And we did that by getting creative with candidate recruitment, by looking at whose families were involved, but maybe who had young kids or who had a small business, but maybe wasn't real active in the party. And when we take that to the state level, if we're going to pick up seats, if we're going to get out of the super minority, we're going to have to recruit candidates who are a little bit different than people who may have been super active for the 24 years that I've been involved. And so, and those candidates are going to look different in central Illinois versus northern Illinois versus southern Illinois. And so I think as conservatives, we have to realize that if we're going to get out of the super minority, we're going to have to get creative with candidate recruitment. And that's not to say anything about what happened in this Senate process.
Yeah, fair, but it's certainly a good point. I mean, listen, I help going out there trying to do it around the country, trying to recruit candidates, train candidates. It's one of the main things I do. And I'll tell you, a lot of people in the room, when we do that, it's the people like let's say John Lopez, he's here. The ones who go to every event, who are around for everything. And the type of person who makes the best possible candidate is oftentimes not necessarily the same as the type of person who makes the best grassroots Republican, who is, carried water for the elephant for 20, 30, 40 years. And those are the kind of people I'd love to be able to reward with an appointment somewhere, but you got to be able to win in a contested race. And they're just not oftentimes the same skill set. Somebody who's been involved in the community, who's been a lawyer, who's been, raised a family, who's been, those are the kind of things you look for in a candidate. Maybe that precludes you from having the time to go to these business meetings and these Republican functions. That's just the reality when you're out there looking for candidates. And so sometimes you're going to have to be a little creative with that.
Democrats are licking their chops right now for this seat.
That's right.
I especially after the mess here. I'll share a text I had from a top Democrat who said she's dead in the water next year. Nabila Syed or Maria Peterson will beat her easily in 2026. They are prepared to spend everything, including the kitchen sink, to win this seat. Yep. and have the money to do it. And more Republican infighting is not going to help you guys in the process.
Fair. Well, I'll close this with this, and we'll talk about the legal stuff next. So one of the complaints I thought was really funny, someone went on the Barrington Hills Observer, which is run by James Hammond, one of Marty's good friends. So you can imagine why they're saying negative things about Darby. But someone was talking about how someone from Barrington Hills doesn't reflect the district. This district is not reflective of Barrington Hills. This was a Marty McLaughlin supporter who Marty is also from Barrington Hills. So, maybe pay attention to the facts before you start lobbing attacks. But anyways, as I mentioned, there's a legal process here. So as this had just concluded, Tom DeVore posted on Facebook some problems he had seen in the appointment process. Now, as usual with Tom DeVore, he tends to miss some details and not, dig far enough in the legalese to know all the details. So a number of the things he listed are not a problem. For instance, talking about her credentials and how you have to have a certain number of things or certain things done within 23 months. That's been found multiple times to be unconstitutional. So nobody's worried about that. Senate Republicans aren't worried about that. That's not going to keep her from getting the seat. There's a number of other things he alleges that were all actually done properly. But there was one thing he did identify that wasn't done properly. And in fact, hasn't ever been done properly. Republicans and Democrats, when they go to fill these seats, they have a meeting, they create a committee, they make the vote to fill the seat, they walk out the room. Legally, actually, there has to be a certain period of time between when you create the committee and when you make the vote. Nobody's ever done it that way. So kudos to Tom DeVore. He did find that one thing that was done wrong in the process. So Keith Brin, Senate Republicans, they have announced a revote for this. It's happening on Friday, the day that this gets released. And so they're going to clean that up in that revote. So I guess I'd say thanks to Tom DeVore for identifying that problem because that was the one thing he identified that could have possibly been an issue. Now, the fact that every appointment since as long as I can remember has always been done that way, I don't know that anybody would have filed a lawsuit about it. But hey, either way, they're going to clean it up so that there aren't any issues here. So that's good news. So that'll be cleaned up as of Friday, the day this podcast releases. And then I know DeVore has a lawsuit pending right now. He filed just today, today being Thursday, or maybe it was yesterday, he filed a temporary restraining order to try to stop this whole thing. So there's going to be he's trying to start a legal fight here. Once this is all cleaned up on Friday, that legal fight's going to basically just disappear because it will be all cleaned up.
DeVore was really hammering the whole 23 months thing, but it doesn't make any sense because it talks about you're a member of a party if you sign a petition. Well, let's say you sign a petition for a Republican candidate. They're running for, I don't know, state representative, judge, who cares?
Well, it's in statute. That's why he cares, even though Colin's right. It's been found unconstitutional, but it's literally in statute.
Well, no,
that's why he cares.
Well, that's what I'm saying here, Patrick, is that even if this doesn't make any sense either way, because you could sign a candidate's petition on a Republican candidate's petition and then vote in the Democratic primary. You can do that. So it doesn't matter because if based on the law that he keeps citing, you would say, well, you signed a Republican petition, you're a Republican, but then you voted in the Democratic primary. So which is it? Doesn't make any sense.
Well, either way, the legalese is all going to get cleaned up, so we can move on from this. Obviously, we'll have to see what happens in 2026, but at least that'll get cleaned up and all dealt with. Any final thoughts on this? I know we spent a lot of time on it, so any final thoughts before we keep moving on? Seeing a lot of head shakes and people ready to move on. All right, so this next topic, I'm a little bit pumped about because usually when we have these debates on topics, it's between me and someone else. Let's be honest, usually Chris, because it's just fun to beat up on Chris. It's fun to do that. But in this reality here, it's actually going to be John and Chris. So let me preview this segment that we haven't done a ton recently. So let me get my computer all set up. We got to open up the segment. Here we go.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
All right, let's talk about it. So, Donald Trump's choice to lead the Department of Labor, Chavez de Reamer. I hope I said that right, but if I didn't, whatever, not my problem. There are people who like the pick. There are people who don't like the pick. And we have on this podcast two people who've been very outspoken on both sides of that. So, John's our guest. He gets to go first. John, why is this pick problematic?
This pick is problematic because of Chavez de Reamer during her one term in Congress. Her record on a variety of issues. She's a candidate of contradictions. An example, immigration. She voted for the HR 2 in the last session, but she also voted for an amnesty bill called HR 16. Also, she decided to co-sponsor the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which is Big Labor's #1 legislative priority for the last 7 to 8 years. It includes needed reform, and I am definitely pro-union, but what's happened is extreme elements of the far left infiltrated that bill and put some real poison pills in it. 2 areas: right to work states and misclassification. I'm going to focus on misclassification because that's the one that's impacting the tens of millions of 1099 independent contractors across this country. This has been a debate that really got thrown to the fire back in 2019 when California passed what's known as Assembly Bill 5 or AB 5, which put in a very strict, what's called an ABC test of, do you have control of your work? Are you in the same line of business as your clients? And do you have the opportunity for profits and loss? And most people could not satisfy the B prong. And therefore, the PRO Act was seen as AB 5 taken nationwide in order to begin to reclassify 1099s who are working legitimate gigs with legitimate clients and law-abiding clients. And Chavez de Reamer endorsed that through a co-sponsorship on July the 15th of last year, of a year and a half after the bill was reintroduced in the 118th Congress. Now, we know Donald Trump, his key to victory was because he galvanized working class people among issues that are important to working class people. That's the rank and file, not union bosses. And you got to give credit to Teamsters President Sean O'Brien. He recognized that. He heard from his membership of the Democrats, whether Biden or Harris, they weren't meeting the needs of what their rank and file wanted. And then there's polling, which I know has been shared on past podcasts, that clearly showed, 50 to 59% of the rank and file are for Donald Trump. The question, though, is that some union leaders are trying to hijack the working class as being a W-2 card-carrying union member. That is not correct. The working class are the working class people. The Wall Street Journal published an editorial on Wednesday, the 19th, that said, are you going to be pro-union or are you going to be pro-worker? If you're pro-worker, you want to have policies that give everyone the opportunity to succeed, whether you choose to be in a union or not. And that's where right to work comes in. That's the other prong of the PRO Act that the far left has attempted to hijack. Right to work states have been in place since Taft-Hartley of 1947. And we're going back nearly 78 years, and states have been able to determine on their own if they're going to be a right to work state. Here in Illinois, we went with the Workers' Rights Amendment. It passed, so we chose not to be a right to work and put it in the Constitution. The other states have chosen the other direction. Tennessee, on the same day that Illinois passed its amendment, they passed a right to work amendment. This is democracy, and yet there are people who always fight for democracy, particularly on the far left, who say, yes, we are for democracy, but when you exercise democracy in the states, then they say, oh, no, we don't want that because we don't like what the states are saying. So that's why Chavez de Reamer, and it was really crucial for her at yesterday's confirmation hearing on Wednesday, the 19th, for her to either disavow the PRO Act, which she did. She used a line of, I was in the lens of representing the Oregon's 5th district, which is where she represented, as well as, but she wasn't strong enough. What I've said to people on social media, she had a very good confirmation hearing, and it wasn't great, but it was very good. I think it's enough to get her confirmed. We'll find out on Thursday, the 27th, when the committee votes to send this to the full Senate or not. So that's my opening. I yield now to Mr. Jackowiak for his opening statement.
Jackowiak, go ahead.
Jackowiak, thank you.
So
No,
usually
it's
before
Jackowiak, but I like Jackowiak. Go ahead.
yeah, usually before a debate, you figure out what your opponent's name is, so that usually is helpful.
Sorry.
In any case, as per John's final point in his opening statement, if that actually is an opening statement, we're going to be here until 5:30.
Hey, you guys just each get one. We're not all sitting around here for an hour.
So
We got
in
other
any
stuff to
case,
do.
per John's last statement during his opening statement, she did disavow the PRO Act in its current form. So every single thing that John talked about in terms of the reclassification of 1099 in relation to the PRO Act, the termination of right to work states in relation to the PRO Act, is no longer a part of this conversation in relation to Chavez de Reamer's status as a candidate as a nominee for Secretary of Labor, because she disavowed the PRO Act. So let's talk about the rest of the issues here. The problem here is that there are so many people who are so stubborn in the old ways of the Republican Party that didn't work. Donald Trump is moving the Republican Party in a different direction on labor. And every person who makes this point about union workers voting for the Republican Party, they're always happy about it. They're always glad to see they're bucking the union bosses. You know, they're standing up to the woke agenda of their union leadership. But when it comes time for those people to actually reach out to their representatives, the president, the representatives in Congress, and say, hey, we voted for you. We voted Republican for you because we really liked what you had to say. Could you please help us in these issues of taking on an issue like right to work, which is bad for union workers? You say, oh, no. We would never, ever going to help union workers, God forbid, because we're the Republican Party. If you want to help union workers, go to the Democratic Party. And then we're shocked when an issue comes up or an election comes up where union workers vote Democrat. Well, why did they do that? Because the Republican Party was leaving them behind. You saw this with Ronald Reagan. I read a publication that you wrote during the Workers' Rights Amendment, John, that talked about Reagan Democrats. And I hear people talk about Reagan Democrats all the time. You know, I come from an area where the Reagan Democrat, basically that name started. But the thing about Reagan Democrats they voted for Ronald Reagan in spite of his anti-union stances because they supported a number of other things. And then further down the ballot, they repudiated everything else that Ronald Reagan was doing in relation to labor. In the midterms, in the 1984 down ballot, in 1982, in those midterms, they repudiated the Reagan agenda when it came to labor policy. Okay? And you also talked about democracy, John.
Let's close this up, Chris.
Oh, come on. He got like 5 minutes, Collin.
Come on.
No, we're talking about democracy here. You know, we talked about, how about Missouri? Missouri in 2008 opposed right to work by a 2-to-1 margin in a deep red state. Okay. Ohio also in 2011 opposed right to work. In some of the strongest areas that opposed right to work were some of Donald Trump's strongest areas in 2016, 2020, and 2024. So we're going to talk about the PRO Act. We're going to talk about right to work. And we're going to talk about all these things. But how about let's talk about the things that are actually moving working people who are in unions to the Republican Party and keeping them here, not giving them everything, because God knows you can't give the unions everything. I'm pro-union, and I know you can't do that. But this idea that you can't move to the center on labor policy to support the people that put your ass into office, that's nonsense. And it puts us in a Republican Party that in 2012 lost because our nominee was the richest, whitest guy you'd ever seen in Mitt Romney, and labor opposed him. So if we want to go back to that Republican Party and start losing, then you could be in charge of it. You'll never see me on this podcast again. I'll quit my job and I'll go back to digging holes for a living. But I support a Republican Party and a national agenda that supports the people that put it in office.
I think both did pretty solid. For time, we're not going to go back and forth any further than that. We got to get to other agenda items. Michael, Patrick, Kyle probably don't care about this topic as much, but any feedback you want to give either of them kudos?
Chris wants to talk about the Constitution. We should be talking about Kash Patel being confirmed as
Yeah, now
FBI
we're getting-
director
That's
today.
not on
That's,
the agenda,
that's the
Patrick.
that's
It's
the
not
real
on the
threat.
agenda.
Nobody cares about this stuff. The real threat are the cracker
Working
jacks that are
people
actually going
care
to be
about
running the
this stuff.
cabinet.
Well, I can tell you we have gotten a lot of feedback on this specifically, just because we've talked a lot about union issues on this podcast. So it sounds like we've got a pretty good balance here of maybe having a pro-union nominee, but not one that wants to pro-act. You might find yourself some common ground here. So you two can hug it out off air and find your common ground. Before I lose our other three participants who want to quit because they're bored, I got to move us on to the next topic. All right, we're going to go straight to our news you can use because we've got to close this down. We're almost out of time. As always, in this section, we're going to provide you, our viewers and our listeners, some key things you should be aware of that you should be using in your conversations, on social media, in campaigns, heck, even in fundraising. We'll go through these pretty quickly, and then anybody who has thoughts can feel free to share them. First one here is there's a Democrat out of Aurora, Barbara Hernandez, who is a Christmas tree of bad legislation. And the latest one she has filed is for universal health care in Illinois. And it's literally written into the bill that it would be illegal for healthcare providers to provide any kind of coverage that duplicates what's going to be in this program. Translated, what does that mean? That means if you like your insurance, you can keep it, but not in Illinois if this bill were to pass. Yes, I know this bill isn't going to pass, but the point is another far left progressive bill by a far left progressive Democrat is being filed here, HB 3780, and Republicans should be talking about it because we don't talk about health care ever, and we ought to be talking about it because voters in this state are frustrated by the high cost of healthcare, and over, Democrats in this state file bills that will increase healthcare costs for working families. So we got to get better about talking about stuff like this. Any quick thoughts from anybody? Nope. All right, we carry on. Democrat out of Northbrook, Tracy Katz-Mule, has filed a bill, HB 2965, that is Michael Butler's favorite bill down in Springfield. He loves this bill. And essentially, if I boil it down and talk about it very quickly, this is HB 2965. If a firearm is lost or stolen and is found by a law enforcement officer, here's the kicker: whether or not you have reported that firearm as being lost or stolen, you will be fined because that law enforcement officer found it. The way that this bill is written, it is written very poorly that even if you support this idea, you can't support the way this bill is being written because it de-incentivizes anyone from ever reporting their firearms as being lost or stolen, because all you're doing is setting yourself up for a fine. And if you refuse to pay that fine, you're going to lose your FOID card. You're going to lose your firearms. You're going to lose your concealed carry. Constitutionality probably comes into play here a little bit, but whatever, that's not my fight. Ultimately, the other part of this that I think is kind of ridiculous is treating lost and stolen firearms as the same. So if somebody comes in and steals your firearm and law enforcement finds it for you, you still pay that fine. So I could understand not maybe wanting to hold people responsible if they lose their firearms, because that's pretty irresponsible. But holding them responsible because their firearms were stolen, it could maybe be a little bit extra ridiculous. Michael, I know you love this bill. Your thoughts?
No, I mean, you pretty much summed it up. It's just insane. Like, it de-incentivizes people from reporting it if it was stolen or lost. Just a joke.
Yeah, there's maybe some tiny parts of this bill you could rewrite into something that's common sense legislation, but that's not what this is. And let's be real, that's not what happens down in Springfield. So, all right, another bill, and this one's a good bill for once. Senate Bill 1527. Sue Rezin and Bill Cunningham have joined up on this. Kudos to them, which would remove the prohibition or the restriction on building nuclear reactors in this state. I'm sure, and here's why we're bringing this up. I am sure the far left and the environmentalists are going to scream and holler about this because God forbid we take advantage of the cleanest source of energy we have available to us. So I'd imagine this bill is going to run into all sorts of opposition, but you should be following this bill. You should be paying attention to this bill. And again, kudos to a Republican and a Democrat for teaming up on this. It is absolutely a common sense step. If we want to become that carbon-free energy sector that Pritzker and the Democrats claim they want, there's no path to get there at this point other than taking advantage of nuclear reactors. Nobody has
certainly. I'm as pro-nuclear as anyone. I think it's going to have a really hard time with the super far left that's run the show on energy policy in the state.
Unfortunately, you are right. But let's keep an eye on it and maybe raise some pressure on it. All right, last one here. We don't have as many this week. Last one here is just let's talk Brandon Johnson for just a second. It was revealed this borrowing plan that he's trying to float that everyone was talking about. Oh, it's a fiscally responsible plan where the details have now come to light. And the city would only be making interest payments for the next 20 years. And then finally they'd start to pay it back. This thing is going to cost over $2 billion for taxpayers in the city of Chicago. This is as fiscally irresponsible as it gets, but this is what you'd expect from Brandon Johnson and the city of Chicago. So certainly we should be talking about this, further showing the basically extreme fiscal irresponsibility, as somebody from the Municipal Markets Analytics has talked about, that this is an extreme version and not going to work. But anybody have thoughts?
This is the trend in the city of Chicago for some reason, where we do these like one-time, cash injections, and then it ends up like costing us billions of dollars anyway. It's absolutely absurd. And this isn't just a Brandon Johnson thing. Rahm did this. Even Daley the Dumber did this. And the mayors before him did the same thing. Okay? Nobody's immune to this problem. But again, there's no serious people in the room over there. There's nobody telling Johnson this is a bad idea. And maybe he doesn't care because, let's be honest, he's not going to be mayor after the next 2 years. So maybe he's just got a biding his time and he'll go back to being a CTU organizer or something.
Let your freak flag fly, because you ain't getting reelected. I mean, that's probably when he can be his most dangerous. All right, let's close this out. As always, we end with our OG and Clown of the Week nominations. Everyone involved gets a chance to put in anybody they'd like. For OG, for clowns, you can do multiple people if you want. Again, having some fun with this. In Illinois, ideally, in Illinois politics especially. But who you guys got? Who do you want to give kudos to, or maybe some scorn for the week?
Collin, I'll go, and it's apologies, it's not Illinois centric, but it's something I saw today that just made me laugh. That our friends had opened the books, and Doge had a article on Fox News. The Department of Education since 2000 is down 600 employees, so they've actually decreased their headcount, which we should applaud. But they are spending 749% more than what they did since 2000. So in government, where 90 to 95% of your costs are headcount, we actually have a department that has proven that you can decrease headcount, but yet raise your expenditures by over 700%.
Who else has thoughts? It's a good start here.
My clown of the week are the people in Tom DeVore's comment section. I don't know how some of you people even consider yourselves Christians, considering some of the things you people are writing on there about Darby Hills and any other thing that Tom DeVore posts. You people that need to be ashamed of yourselves. You need to log off Facebook. You need to get a life, touch some grass, because I don't know why you're, commenting on Tom DeVore's Facebook page at 2:00 in the morning on a Friday night, and why I'm looking at you commenting on Tom DeVore's Facebook page at 2 a.m. on a Friday night. Touch grass if you're in Tom DeVore's comment section.
I think Chris just outed himself. I think everybody needs a life in that scenario. What else y'all got?
I'm not gonna say the name because we don't need to go there, but there's an employee of Channel 25 News, which is out of Peoria, Illinois, and she posted a image that said, "Who will kill Elon Musk?" And I think that that's deserving of a clown of the week. We shouldn't be threatening to kill anybody or asking for it.
And you're missing one part of that, Michael. It was also added to that. I don't know, but one thing is for sure, I will be celebrating when it happens. You can't miss that key part. So I'll say the name. It's Denise Hager, because absolutely deserves to be called out. Definitely worthy of a Clown of the Week nomination.
Okay, I'm going to go with a clown in, I mentioned earlier, newly minted DNC chairman Ken Martin. If you read this memo from February the 18th, he's sticking to the 2024 playbook, which is what they lost, trying to win back working class voters through scaring voters about Project 2025 and all the bad things that Trump's allegedly going to do, and the co-presidency of Elon Musk. You guys haven't learned. You haven't learned. And I honestly do think Governor Pritzker took some things from that memo and put it into his speech from Wednesday, but that's just my opinion. I've got to give an OG to the week because this was posted late last Thursday, so after the broadcast, the taping, Congressman Kevin Kiley of California, really looking for a solution to this long-running independent contractor mess. He filed 2 bills in Washington. One's called the Modern Worker Empowerment Act, which basically codifies the Donald Trump independent contractor rules from the end of his first term. You're going to put it into legislation. Right now, the Department of Labor, especially under Biden, was using rules to try to regulate independent contractors. You got to put it into law. And then he also went one better and filed HR 1320, which is the Modern Worker Security Act. This allows for portable benefits, for limited portable benefits for ICs, and they don't lose their 1099 tax status. And that's been a crucial part of what the left is trying to do to put independents out of business, whether it's truckers. Think about this. Chairman Marcus
John, we're
Evans,
running out of time here. Give us the short version, please.
Short version says, there are too many 1099s, more than you know, and he did something right. Kudos to Congressman Kiley.
Appreciate that, buddy. Anybody else have any others they want to put in?
I have very few nice things to say about people in politics these days, so I will give kudos to people who are running for local office right now. I was driving the other day to pick up our toddler from daycare or slash preschool, whatever we're calling it, and there was a group out knocking on doors when it was literally 4 degrees outside. This is a terrible time of year to run for office, and these are terrible jobs for the most part, especially school boards where you don't get paid a thing. So kudos to those who are out working their tails off to try and make their communities better. I live in a community that has a contested mayor's race, and it's probably not going to get nicer between now and April, and it's certainly impressive to see people working hard for that. I'll just quickly on the national stuff to the Trump administration, and specifically Marco Rubio, who sold his soul to become Secretary of State and sell out our allies like Ukraine to go to the table and buddy up to Vladimir Putin. Just makes me sick.
Any other thoughts? I've got a handful. I'll do a couple of my OGs here. So Craig Roberts, we've got to mention. This isn't really necessarily an OG, but has to be mentioned. Passed away. He was an OG, and that's why I want to mention it. Just thoughts and prayers to his family. I know as Chief of Staff to John Shimkus, and frankly, many people called him the Dean of the Republican delegation for a long time. Lots of people relied on him as a mentor in politics. So to the Roberts family, thank you for the time we got to spend with Craig, and thoughts and prayers are with all you. To John Geocaris and his wife, Tamara Edwards, kudos to you all for the birth of your son. John's been on our podcast a few times. Their baby boy was born Jason Demetrios Geocaris. As you can tell, John's pretty Greek, comes across in the name. Baby is cute, mama's healthy. It's awesome to see. Bobby Jenks, former White Sox pitcher and World Series hero, announced he had stomach cancer. He's going to kick cancer's ass, and when he does, he'll be an OG. So wanted to bring that up. Also, I want to give kudos to Tony McCombie and the Illinois Freedom Caucus. It appears they may have buried the hatchet here and moved on from some of the previous fights. Committee positions were given, offices were restored. I'm sure there'll be tension in the future, but thank you guys for burying the hatchet. We got to work together, so kudos to you. And again, proving that I want to be bipartisan here, or at least fair, I will again give kudos to Tony McCombie. She filed a number of bills that I think are awesome, that again, you don't tend to see out of Republicans. HB 2801, 2802, 2806, all focused on helping young women pursue careers and helping support young women. Love to see this, and we need to see more of this out of Republicans, showing that Republicans care. So kudos to Tony McCombie. And I'll say this, I don't think I've given a OG nomination ever to this individual, but as a result of the what he filed, sheesh, I'm blanking because it's been
executive order.
Thank you, Michael. The executive order on IVF, supporting IVF and making sure that people have access to IVF treatments, lowering costs and reducing barriers to IVF. I will add Donald Trump to the list. Obviously, strong supporters of IVF. My little baby boy, Teddy, wouldn't be here if it wasn't a result of that. Republicans support IVF. Conservatives support IVF. Social conservatives support IVF. Christians support IVF. There's a couple nut jobs on my Facebook page who are constantly complaining about IVF, but they are the outliers. Pro-life is pro-life, and thanks to IVF, we've got a baby boy, and I couldn't be more happy about it. I'll take a breath there. Anybody else have anyone else you want to add before I give a few clowns and then we close the episode? All right, I'll do this quick. Couple clowns here. We got to go JB Pritzker for some of the stuff in his speech, specifically three things that aren't being talked about enough. Number one, Ray Long pointed this out for the Tribune. No comments about ethics laws in his speech. I understand it's early in the process, but he found plenty of time to talk about other things in the speech that had nothing to do with the budget. He could have found time to talk about ethics in light of Madigan just being found guilty, but he didn't, of course, because it's not a priority. He did find time to say they wanted to privatize the lottery, even though the lottery, they admit, has been making record amounts of money for the state. But now they want to, or not privatize, they want to take it over with the government because, hey, you never let a private institution run something, especially if they're running it well. Government must take it over. Also, cell phones in classrooms. We don't know yet if it's a good thing taking cell phones out of classrooms. I tend to think it probably is. But in the state of Illinois, you have a bunch of school districts who have begun to test this. And yet Pritzker came out and said, you know what? Let's just outlaw it all across the state immediately. Why can't we wait for a minute and actually see if these tests work? Let's actually get some data on this before we just say, all right, you know what? I'm just going to ban it. Like, let's actually get some data for once in our legislating instead of just immediately going, I'm going to do something I think is politically expedient. All right, moving on. This one I'm going to skip because we just don't have the time. Adding to my clowns of the week, the fight between Tony McCombie and Tom DeVore. It does not need to happen. I gave kudos to McCombie. I now need to give a little bit of shade here. It's beneath her as the leader. Yes, I know Tom DeVore's driving you crazy. It's also beneath him to be doing this as well. But you're the leader, Tony. Please move on from it. Ignore him. This is not what we need to be spending our time on. The fight back and forth between the two of them just makes us all as Republicans look bad. Please, let's stop it. It's not helping anybody. Bob Odenkirk for failing in his lawsuit. After he lost, he filed a RICO lawsuit against anybody and everybody he could find just because he wanted to blame everybody but himself for his loss. It was announced this week that he lost that lawsuit. Nobody is sad for Odenkirk and Joliet. I'm going to skip this one because nobody cares. Let's talk about Larry Dominic putting out robocalls in his community. He used a government phone number while doing it, but I just want to give him a clown of the week for doing robocalls. Who still does robocalls nowadays?
Hey, that's effective in Cicero, man. You don't know Cicero politics. Those robocalls get him elected.
Oh my God. I can't even believe it. All right, couple more, then we're done here. Shields Township. So Sandy Hart and the Democrats were trying to run a slate in Shields Township to knock out the common sense center right group that was leading the township, but they failed because their candidates got knocked off the ballot. They filed their paperwork wrong, including the supervisor candidate who tried to hide what city she lived in because she was trying to pretend like she had the support of a pretty politically effective organization called the Vote Lake Bluff Committee. So she tried to hide that she was not from Lake Bluff. And then it turns out you can't do that. You actually got to list where you're from on your petition. So she got knocked off the ballot. These are the kind of things about politics I just love. All right, couple more things here. This is one for Chris here. So Joy Cunningham decided to take $40,000 from Ed Burke just a few days after the election. What that means is Ed Burke cut her a check. She held on to it until the election was over and then deposited it after the election. That's what that means. And here we go. How dumb are you to take money from Ed Burke, who is doing time in prison for a corruption conviction? So hello, dude. Don't do that. Last two, I promise. So Chicago Bears have to make the list. I know Chris will support this. They're raising ticket prices for the second straight year by an average of 10%. That's actually not why they're being listed here. Why they're being listed as my clown of the week is their reasoning for doing it. They said specifically that it's a few factors, but especially because we have a strong home schedule ahead. And that's why we've raised those ticket prices. So you look, who are they actually playing at home this year? Dallas Cowboys, bottom feeders, New York Giants, bottom feeders, Cleveland Browns, bottom feeders, Pittsburgh Steelers, who maybe will be decent, New Orleans Saints, who are not going to do anything this year. They have a horrible slate of home games this year, and yet they're trying to claim that's the reason why they raised ticket prices. Come on, you can do better than that. My final one is this. The Science Museum in London. I'm going out of the country for my last one. The Science Museum in London has come out and said that they believe that Lego is anti-LGBT because the bricks have female and male parts that are mate with each other. These toy bricks being gendered reinforce the idea that heterosexuality is the norm. I kid you not, Google it. I am not making this up. That's how crazy the far left has gone. Apparently Lego is sexist now. So that's where we're at in society in 2025. And I don't want to live on this planet anymore. All right.
So your light socket is bad then, apparently.
I've been waiting
So,
for light sockets. I didn't have Lego on my bingo card for what's sexist in 2025. All right, let's close this thing down. Let's get our team out of the way first so our guests can have the final word. Michael, your final thoughts.
I just think, we need more adults. So everybody needs to start acting like one.
Says the youngest guy in the podcast or the second youngest guy in the podcast. I mean, if you're
Second.
calling for it, that means it's bad.
It's bad.
Chris?
Michael's the second youngest. I'm the youngest. Well, thank you for joining us on another hour and a half plus excursion through the horrors of the Illinois Republican Party. There's a couple of things. We have local elections in some jurisdictions on Tuesday. So if you live in such jurisdiction with a primary, get out and vote. There's a lot going on in Cook County. There's Homer Township, which everybody knows about. Get out and vote. Second thing, tomorrow, Blandick Building, Senate Bill 9. This is to legalize assisted suicide in the state of Illinois. The first Senate hearings tomorrow at the Blandick Building. We're trying to get witness slips, so go on the ILGA website, fill a witness slip in opposition to Senate Bill 9. God, we can't have assisted suicide in this state. This is a step too far. So please, if you're a conservative, and you're probably a Democrat if you're watching this podcast, but if you're one of the conservatives who watches us, please fill a witness slip in opposition to Senate Bill 9. We can't have assisted suicide in this state. Thank you.
Chris and his groupies on the left. All right, to our guests, let's see. Patrick, if you give us your final thoughts.
yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to piggyback off of Michael. And this is something I've been talking about lately. Is I'm really in a negative space about our politics, state and federal lately. And that's me being mad at both parties. It seems nobody has their stuff together, and I'm just desperately hoping that the grown-ups show up at some point. They're not in the U.S. Senate with these terrible cabinet confirmation votes, and they're not in the House where you've got nobody who wants to actually get a budget done, and in Springfield certainly there are good people and there are people who are just completely off their rocker. So if I have any hope for 2025, it's to finally see some grown-ups show up and start to actually move us forward, because it's an untenable situation that we're in right now. And I will leave with thanks to Collin for the bobblehead of this handsome fella. He's more handsome and skinnier than the real thing, but I'm very happy to have him in my office.
I missed the beard, Patrick. The beard looks really good on you. All right, John, your final thoughts, and I'll ask you if you want to maybe push people to your Twitter, where you're very prolific on a lot of these topics, and keep your closing comments short. I'd appreciate it.
I will. All right. Let's just John Lopez _PPC is my Twitter. And I'm going to echo Chris. Elections are coming for some people on Tuesday, the 25th. The Dalton mayoral Democratic primary, the Algonquin Township Republican primary, and the nonpartisan primary in the city of Aurora. Mayor Richard Irvin's first time on the ballot since his gubernatorial primary loss. There are 2 aldermen running. Could he be knocked out by then? Not likely, but you never know. Let's see what the voters have to say on Tuesday, and get out and vote. If you have to vote, please vote.
Awesome. Nice job, John. Kyle, thank you for spending the time. I know we went over time, so I appreciate you being patient. Your final thoughts as you close out the week for us.
My final thought was, thank gosh, we've got a warm-up coming here on Monday and Tuesday. So for those of us who do enjoy a stick every now and again, can maybe get outside and enjoy it.
I didn't know you were a fellow partaker. Next time I'm in Springfield, the cigar's on me, my friend.
You bet.
I love it. All right. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. As Chris said, some of these episodes get kind of packed, but we had a lot to cover this week. I appreciate you guys sticking with us. To Lane Davis, our producer, thank you for the time you put into this. To everybody, we'll be back in your inboxes next week with what I'm sure will be another thought-provoking and controversial episode of The Smoke-Filled Room. Until then, primaries, if you have them, are on Tuesday, so make sure you get out and vote. We'll catch you all soon.